Did you guys see that? Did you guys see that this conflict and the discourse around it, like ended the H3 Hasan?
I really don't know anything about those guys.
You're not plugged into them at all.
Not
trying to stay away from that sort of thing.
What happened? Were they friends and now they're not, or is the
well,
opposite,
they did a podcast together for I want to say like 2 years. It's called The Leftovers, and it was a really interesting cultural kind of like online cultural moment to watch that friendship sort of disintegrate over time, because it started to fray during like a conversation about like capitalism versus communism stuff. And what had happened was like H3 had, whether intentionally or unintentionally, cultivated through his partnership with Hasan, cultivated like a really left-wing audience, like a hammer and sickle, like we need to like destroy capital kind of like audience. And they started to like have this like disagreement where Ethan was like willing to say, you know, there's plenty of flaws with capitalism. There's a lot of gaps. There's a lot of poverty, you know, but I'm just not with you with the whole like Chinese kind of stuff, like or like full on hammer and sickle stuff. And then like a few months later, it culminated this fracture of their friendship with the Palestinian Israeli conflict, because Ethan is a dual citizen. Like he has citizenship in Israel. He has family in Israel.
His
and so
girl is Israeli, right? Or also as dual. Yeah.
And so a lot of Ethan's audience were, I mean, some of them were just full on like
actually
celebrating October 7th, you know, like and so like Ethan was he was like saying like, look, I'm willing to tell you like what the Israelis have been doing to Palestinians for decades is wrong, and Netanyahu and the Likud party and you know the Israeli Palestinian the treatment of Palestinians, but Hamas, like what they did is not good. And then like a bunch of the audience were calling him like a racist, genocidal, apartheid supporter. And dude,
they call us that all the time. They don't mean it.
That just means hello in online talk.
Yeah, that's just howdy.
That's how they think. Not very good at
it was an interesting kind of like, it was an interesting moment because it's just like,
for him to realize that's that's pretty awkward.
So there was a big schism in both of their audiences.
They don't do the podcast anymore, and it was just too much. Like there was like
free and open discussion had a limit for him. Yeah,
and that was a pretty big podcast, you know. So to like walk away from that was like pretty significant.
You think the audience divided them mostly?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was the conflict and the audience. There's this thing called audience capture. Are you guys familiar with the concept of audience capture? It's like, so if you're like an influencer person and you cover politics or you cover cultural stuff, and you end up cultivating an audience over time, like you guys have cultivated kind of like a slightly more right-wing audience, I would say, right? And but like what happens with a lot of creators is they start to notice like, oh, well, I'll get, you know, you either consciously or unconsciously know, like I'm going to get more engagement if I frame certain things this way or that way. And so there ends up being this sort of like extremism pipeline that happens, and then it gets to a point where the creator, they're not really being authentic with their thoughts. They're relaying what they think their audience is going to want to hear. So you know,
Zach phrased it really well. Let me read it because it's interesting. Audience capture is a self-reinforcing feedback loop that involves telling one's audience what they want to hear and getting rewarded for it.
And then they have to go further and further. So they're like, oh, when I'm talking about how awesome Stalin was, I get lots of likes and comments.
Well, see, it's people easy to calling get around that comrade. Though. We just always, one of us has to disagree so that we're always on both sides. We literally are. It's very rarely that all three of us are like full. And
if we all agree, someone will jump on the other side.
Yeah, and then there'll be, if we all agree, there's at least a dissenting opinion from somebody. They're like, look, all right, I'll co-sign that. Yeah, but here's the thing about that. You need to have a little. You need disagreement.
Yeah, it's not so interesting to listen.
But here's where I think our show does it a lot in like the meanness, right? So this is a show where we laugh at people fighting cars and think it's hilarious at that mismatch, and then the audience turns that same spirit on us, and it's like, well, don't be surprised, fucknard.
Yeah, if we got hit in a parking lot, they would have no sympathy.
Exactly.
But that's because they're dumb. Because I don't think it's funny when people get hit by cars. I think it's funny when fat black women get mad at each other. One of them gets behind the wheel of her Intrepid, and the other one still continues to show the same amount of gusto in the physical altercation, despite the fact that said Intrepid is 4,200 pounds of killing machine.
Those women are like 0-31 against the Intrepid in all the videos Kyle sent me. Huge losing streak. I don't think they're going to turn the franchise around. The Intrepid is.
I have seen so many ladies get ran down by Chrysler 300s and it still tickles me to death. I love it because but I don't want to see just some poor pedestrian get hit like that thing in Nice, France, when that terrorist attack and people got ran over. That's not funny. That's horrific. But if you're like, you're not going to talk to me that way, what you going to do? Run me. And they're like,
right. Oh, did you get in your car? Well, I took off my high heel shoe. Let's go.
That's an actual video.
I'm familiar with the genre.
Oh, you haven't seen this? Basically, two people are in a conflict. Someone gets in a car, and the other person, rather than like running or taking cover behind a light pole, is like, I'm not afraid of your car. And I have a theory, like Kyle mentioned the race thing, but I think it's the sex thing. I think that sometimes women feel like they're not going to get hit because it doesn't happen to them very much. You know, the punch in the mouth is a very extreme, uncommon route to take for girls.
Yeah.
So I
get hit in the mouth in 10 minutes. I go out there and say the wrong shit. I promise you. I go to Circle K, it'll go down.
It could happen with your friend. Like if you mouth off the Scott enough, then, you know, it might go that way. I don't know.
Say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Man, your dog's
a little bit.